If you didn't know it, American badgers are a keystone species here in the Bay Area. And at Open Space Authority, we seek to understand how they occupy the landscape and move across it. My name is Lillian Amaral, and I'm a GIS technician here at the Open Space Authority, and I've been mapping badger occurrences and the barriers that they face as they move across the landscape. Today we're at Coyote Valley Open Space Preserve, just 20 miles south of downtown San Jose. The Coyote Valley floor is one of the last intact valley floor connections between the Santa Cruz Mountains and the Diablo Range, and that makes it critically important to protect from development to give species like American badgers a fair chance at making their journey across the valley. Mapping the anticipated routes a badger might take across the valley is no easy feat, and it would be an even greater challenge if I didn't know just the right people to badger for some information. Today we're here with Dr. Jessie Quinn, whose research studied the population distribution and movement patterns of American badgers throughout the state of California. So Jessie, can you tell me what an American badger is and some unique characteristics and traits they have, and what sets them apart from other wildlife and other types of badgers?
Yes, I sure can. So to the first part of your question about what is an American badger, badgers are medium-sized carnivores that are part of the mustelid family. So they're fairly closely related to weasels and skunks and otters and wolverines. There are several species of badgers worldwide, but here in North America and Northern Central America, we have only one, the American badger. So some of the unique ecological traits of badgers is that they are a fossorial carnivore. Fossorial means that they spend a lot of time below ground. They dig a lot. Their whole physiology is made for them to dig easily. They primarily hunt burrowing small mammals and rodents. And another unique aspect of their ecology as a carnivore is that they're grassland specialists. So you find them mostly in grasslands and also open stages of other habitat types. As I said earlier, we only have the one species in North America and Northern Central America. There are several other species of badgers worldwide, and probably some of the most well-known ones are the European badgers. And a key difference between American badgers and European badgers is that European badgers live in social groups, in communal dens, and American badgers are very solitary.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
I'm curious to know, how do American badgers communicate with one another?
that's a good question. They primarily communicate, like a lot of mustelids, via smell. So they do have scent glands that they use to mark areas where they've been. So often around the burrows that they inhabit or the tailings in front of their burrows. And that's how they can identify which other badgers are in the area. They do have some vocalizations, but they're mostly for, when they're upset or when they're threatened. So they will hiss or kind of growl. But, being solitary animals, they don't have the need for sophisticated communication like a pack of, wolves would, or even some of the big cats. So, for the most part, they're fairly quiet, but they do have very strong, ability to for scent, and so they do communicate through smell.
Okay, so you've done all this research on American badgers. What is the most surprising thing you've learned about them?
I think the two most surprising things, one was really how widespread they are in California, despite people not knowing they were there. I kind of selected sites by calling land managers and asking, if they had these kind of, large blocks of grassland habitat, and asked them, oh, do you have badgers? Can I come out and survey for them? And a lot of them said, oh, I don't think so, but you're welcome to come look. And almost inevitably on all of them, if they were large enough, there was signs of badgers either being there or having been there just by finding their holes and their dens. So that was surprising to me because a lot of people don't even know that there are badgers at all in California. I would say the second thing that was really surprising was, despite all I had read about their physiology, it was really interesting to actually have one in hand and see it firsthand. The way that they are adapted to their habitat is incredible. They have very loose, very tough skin that they kind of like can move around inside of. And so when you pick them up, it's like handfuls of loose skin, super tough skin. And, their front paws are a lot larger than their back paws because they kind of use them to paddle into the soil. So those were impressive to see. Their big hands,
I bet.
and their big claws that they use for digging.
So what's one myth or misconception about badgers that you'd love to debunk?
Well, the one that I always want to debunk is the idea that badgers are vicious. They are aggressive when they're threatened, but it's almost always a defensive posture. It is not like a badger will just pop out of a burrow and chase you down the road. They don't have a lot of other defenses besides their behavior from other predators because they have such short legs. They can't run very fast. They can't climb trees. So they have to rely on their behavior and their physiology as their major, kind of defenses against predators. So like I said, that really loose skin makes it very hard for an owl or a coyote to actually get a hold of them. They can kind of just roll right out of, the claws or the talons of a raptor or another predator. And then, the behavior that they're more known for is that they'll kind of stand up for themselves against a coyote or a mountain lion or bear. I've seen video of them standing up to a herd of bison. And it's really because that's kind of what they have to do because they can't flee unless there's a burrow nearby. They're not really proactively vicious. They are, like a lot of wildlife, just very defensive when they're confronted by a threat.
If they were facing a threat, is there a possibility that they could flee underground?
Yeah, and that's usually what they will do. So, if they see something and they have time, they'll try to look for a burrow and just go underground. Sometimes they will dig a burrow or enlarge kind of a shallow burrow really fast. They can just appear underground, less than a minute, and they're out of sight, and then they'll block it up behind them. So yeah, I think that's their preferred mode of escape. I think they'd rather do that because it's less risky than having to face a predator, but they'll do either, whatever's, makes more sense in the moment.
Well, that's all the questions I have, but we do have some questions from the public that I'd love for you to answer.
Oh, great. Happy to.
Is it possible for badgers to hunt larger prey, or are they sort of more an opportunistic hunter?
Their main prey will always be burrowing mammals. Well, burrowing rodents usually. So in California ground squirrels is probably their largest prey that they'll actively hunt. In the Great Plains, they will focus on prairie dogs, which are pretty big. So they can take relatively large prey, but they're also opportunistic. So besides having that kind of solid, reliable base of burrowing mammals, they will also take birds or bird nests. They'll dig up wasp nests or bees nests. I've seen that here in California and eat that. I've seen them eat, dig wood rats out of their lodges. So in some ways they are opportunistic. They'll also scavenge prey that's died by some other means or killed by some other predator. So yeah, they do tend to be opportunistic, but they are always kind of reliant on that, that consistent prey base of the burrowing rodents.
Could you help me understand what role do badgers play in the grassland ecosystem?
That's a really good question because we don't think of the grassland ecosystem in California very much, but where we do think of that grassland system is on the Great Plains, and we kind of have a mini version of that in California. But their burrows provide habitat for other species. So for weasels, burrowing owls are one of the main species that will reoccupy a badger burrow. Down south, kit fox, the San Joaquin kit fox will use badger burrows. So they do provide habitat for animals that live in burrows but don't necessarily dig their own burrows. And then they also serve as kind of a control for some of those rodent populations, California ground squirrels and gophers, voles, where they occur. And then they also, because of the turning over the soil, that's another kind of benefit that they provide to the ecosystem, is providing this fresh soil for new plants to colonize.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Quinn, for giving us some insight into the mysterious life of badgers here, and I appreciate all the amazing work you've been doing.
Well, thank you. And I really appreciate you inviting me to talk about badgers because I love to talk about badgers. And I also really appreciate the work that Open Space Authority is doing with badgers. It's very valuable. And thank you for being a part of that.
Okay, now that we've learned a whole lot about American badgers, what kind of species they are, and how they interact with the landscape, I think it will be helpful for us to meet with the Open Space Authority's Natural Resources Manager, Aaron Hébert, so that he could give us some insight into American badger habitat and the environmental problems that they face throughout the Open Space Authority's jurisdiction. Hi, Aaron. Thanks for being here with me today. So my first question for you is, where do they live in Santa Clara Valley?
Badgers mostly live in the hills surrounding Santa Clara Valley, but sometimes they come down into the valley floor bottom, usually in search of food or trying to find new habitat or mates.
Can you help me understand what habitat fragmentation means and what are those implications for badgers?
Habitat fragmentation is usually the development of houses or office complexes or even roads and highways that sort of breaks up bigger patches of habitat, in this case grasslands for badgers, into smaller and smaller pieces that badgers have trouble moving between two fragmented halves of a landscape. So in Santa Clara County, a lot of the valley floor has been developed, and badgers now have trouble moving, like a lot of species, between the Diablo Range in the east and the Santa Cruz Mountains in the west. So habitat fragmentation is the process whereby humans are making smaller and smaller habitats for animals.
And I also have some questions from the public for you. Do badgers occur in inner Silicon Valley cities, and would it be likely to see them while I'm on a walk?
Badgers are very infrequently found in city landscapes. They're unlikely to be in like downtown San Jose, for example, but kind of as you get closer to some of their core grassland habitats, people do sometimes see them in their backyard, often digging for gophers and sort of similar. So if you're just walking about town, it's pretty unlikely that you would see one. Even actually, if you're in one of their habitat areas, you might not necessarily see them. They're pretty elusive. They do a lot of their movement at night. But if you go to the right place, you might have a chance.
Have you seen one?
I have seen one in Sierra Vista Open Space Preserve.
Awesome. Lucky guy. So you kind of touched on this in the last one, but when and where are American badgers most active and most likely to be seen?
They're most active at night, which is one of the reasons people don't see them a lot. They're always searching for food. That's kind of what they're doing. So a lot of times they're either underground, eating, sleeping, mating potentially, or they're out sort of moving between grasslands in search of food. So if you want to see one, probably the best place I can recommend is Sierra Vista Open Space Preserve. Our staff see them there somewhat regularly. It's just the right kind of habitat, and there's a lot of food for them there in ground squirrel populations.
Why do you think they operate at night?
Badgers are pretty avoidant of other predators, of people. So their ability to move when kind of we're not around helps them move through the landscape safely.
What other threats do they face?
Because badgers really rely on ground squirrels and gophers to sustain themselves, ground squirrels and gophers can be pests. I think anyone who has a garden and has those in their backyards know that it's a real challenge to have a garden and have ground squirrels. So unfortunately, some people use rodenticides in order to control either rats or ground squirrels or gophers. And those rodenticides, of course, they poison the pests in question, but they also tend to get eaten by other larger mammals or birds and kind of move up the food chain. So poisoning of gophers and ground squirrels not only directly decreases the food that badgers have available to them, but poison can actually get consumed by badgers themselves. We see this with bobcats as well as in our area, that once they have consumed poisoned rodents, they'll develop mange and start to look really sort of scraggly. We get calls pretty regularly in our preserves of people reporting bobcats that really look bad. So rodenticides are a big issue for badgers and for a lot of different species. The other threat that badgers face is not just that habitat fragmentation from roads and highways, but actually direct wildlife vehicle collisions or badger roadkill is a big problem. Badgers are fairly bold species. They don't have a lot of predators. And as Dr. Quinn was describing, they kind of face down their predators. And people kind of speculate this is one of the reasons that they're not afraid of cars, is that they're really not afraid of anything. But the result is that they will enter into the roadway, and because they're not very fast, they can be killed. So unfortunately, a lot of the data we have about badgers, particularly in Santa Clara Valley, is actually roadkill occurrences where badgers have been trying to move between grassland habitats but have been killed on the road.
What is being done at the state, local, and federal level to protect American badgers?
So at the local level, the Santa Clara Valley Habitat Agency, who's a partner organization of ours, is proposing to list or protect the badger under the Valley Habitat Plan, meaning that when there is development in Santa Clara County, the people who are doing the development in partner with the Valley Habitat Agency will have to avoid impacts to badgers or mitigate the impacts to badgers. Because badgers are a, quote, species of special concern, which means that they're protected under the California Endangered Species Act, but they enjoy the lowest level of protection. So we're doing a little bit more here in the Santa Clara Valley to protect our badger populations. The other thing that's going on at the state level is the California Department of Fish and Wildlife is partnering with organizations like the Open Space Authority to collect hare, scat, and occasionally roadkill to collect badger DNA and to sort of centralize those in a laboratory and analyze the DNA in order to figure out how is the badger population doing across the state, and are these isolated populations of badgers actually different from each other? How are they doing? Are the different regions of grasslands around the state, are they isolated? Are they together? So collecting the DNA is the first step in that process.
I bet that's pretty telling data.
Yeah, I think the DNA is going to help sort of drive the next era of badger conservation in understanding what's the right level of protection and effort that conservation organizations and the state need to take in order to protect the species.
Okay, so on a finer scale, more local to us, what is the Open Space Authority doing for the conservation work around American badgers?
The Open Space Authority is a member organization of what's called the Santa Cruz Mountain Stewardship Network. And as the name implies, it's a network of organizations that steward the Santa Cruz Mountains. And I serve on the wildlife working group. And collectively, this group decided that working on badgers would be really important because they really haven't been studied as much. They haven't been thought of as much as some of our other iconic species like salmonids or redwoods or things that sort of the general public is aware of. So this coalition of stewardship organizations decided let's work on badgers. And so that collective effort kind of has three prongs. One is how do we best manage for the species in a preserve like where we're sitting today? So sort of best management practices. How do we survey for badgers? The other element I touched on is how do we move these efforts along at the state level? So that's the genetic analysis, that's advocating for the protection of the species. And then the third prong is we have started a badger habitat corridor model. And that is why I hired you, actually. is that Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District had done quite a bit of badger habitat modeling kind of in the Santa Cruz Mountains, but didn't come into Santa Clara County. And so an obvious next step for this group was, well, let's create a badger habitat corridor model that really extends throughout the sort of, Santa Cruz, San Mateo, and Santa Clara counties, so that kind of the regional population could be better studied and understood, particularly because development in Silicon Valley and the peninsula has kind of isolated these big grassland bioregions. So how do badgers move through the Santa Cruz Mountains and move across Santa Clara Valley is a big open question.
So this concept that you brought up of habitat and corridor modeling is super unfamiliar to me. And I'm curious if you could help me understand, what is a wildlife corridor? Why are they important, and particularly for wildlife like American badgers?
Wildlife corridors are really essential habitat that wildlife need to move between two bigger areas. So in this region, we often talk about the wildlife corridor that is Coyote Valley, where we're sitting today. And Coyote Valley is a wildlife corridor between the Santa Cruz Mountains and the Diablo Range to the east. And so even though Coyote Valley is maybe only a couple miles wide and tall, it connects over 1 million acres of habitat on both sides. And that's really because the two mountain ranges just come very close together here, and they're surrounded by the Pacific Ocean, the bay, and development. And so in order for wildlife to make use of this, sort of narrow corridor, we have to make it work for them. We have to create safe passage through the wildlife corridor. So our Coyote Valley Conservation Areas Master Plan is really at its heart a project to protect Coyote Valley from development, to restore its watersheds, but also to create that kind of safe passage so that wildlife can move across this very narrow landscape in Coyote Valley. So badgers are one of those species. They are one of our focal species, whereby we really want to create the kinds of conditions across this landscape that allow them to move naturally. I described earlier how, unfortunately, a lot of the data we have about badgers in Coyote Valley is actually roadkill. So we are looking at how to improve Coyote Valley to keep badgers off the road, to have them crawl through culverts in order to get to the Diablo Range and vice versa. So wildlife corridors and Coyote Valley are really essential for sustaining not just the movement of wildlife, but the genetic exchange between large blocks of habitat so that they're not isolated. The Santa Cruz Mountains are kind of an island, as it were, like Hawaii or something like that. But by restoring Coyote Valley and creating that connection, we can link so much of those habitats together, and populations like badgers, mountain lion, and other species can make use of a much larger habitat than they would otherwise. So Lillian, let me ask you a question. Why did I hire you, and what are you doing here?
Well, Aaron, geographic data can tell you a whole lot of information if you know how to work with it and manipulate it to tell a story. And that's exactly what I'm doing for you. I have taken the time to learn all about badger ecology and how they occupy these landscapes. And I've turned that knowledge into a search for data. And I will be using that data to integrate with computer models that will help me map the most likely routes of movement for American badgers from the Santa Cruz Mountains to the Diablo Range. And that data is something that I believe is extremely useful for land managers like yourself, because it would be so hard to figure out where on the landscape do we need to put our limited resources that go towards conservation. It would be hard to do that without the mapping resources. And I believe that using these tools of geographic analysis really help us use those limited resources for conservation and direct them in the areas throughout the region that need them the most. Can you tell me who the Open Space Authority collaborates with to better understand the challenges facing the American badger population?
So we partner with a variety of organizations to do this work. It's not just us. First, we work through the Santa Cruz Mountain Stewardship Network, which is a 25 organizations that collaborate on stewardship in this bioregion. Within that, some of our close partner organizations include the Santa Clara Valley Habitat Agency, who is responsible for the protection of the species in Santa Clara County, the Midpeninsula Regional Open Space District, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, who protects the species and is leading the genetic studies. And we're doing some degree of research with UC Santa Cruz and their natural reserve system. So a big coalition of folks who do everything from science to management in order to better protect the species.
What can the public be doing to help the conservation of American badgers?
Well, when you're driving in a rural area, one of the beautiful parts of the county, slow down. Wildlife vehicle collisions are all too common, and they're mostly caused by speeding. So that's one easy thing you can do when you're driving to an open space preserve is just take it easy and enjoy the trip. Rodenticides are a big issue for badger and for a ton of other species. So there are a lot of other tools and a lot of other ways of dealing with rodents, ground squirrels, and gophers besides rodenticides. So really not using those. We also do a lot of habitat restoration here at the Open Space Authority. So volunteering with an organization that restores the habitat will help the badgers as well. The other thing that we find really useful is when people do see badgers, even if it is a little bit elusive, that they report them into iNaturalist or tell one of our field staff so that we can capture that data and it can actually help some of the modeling that you were describing. And the other thing is just because they're not very well-known species is just tell your friends that we have them. Tell people why they're important. Badgers are an important part of our grassland ecosystem. Not a lot of people care about them or know about them. So just kind of raising people's awareness about badgers, I think is a really good thing that everyone can do.
Totally. Every time I tell somebody the project that I've been working on, they have seemingly blank stare and they're like, did you just say beaver? No, badger. Well, there you have it. Thank you so much for joining us under the oaks for a bit of badger banter. You can learn more about the Open Space Authority's habitat restoration and land stewardship at openspaceauthority.org.